大丈夫. So we will begin the next meeting shortly, so may I ask you to be seated? Thank you.
Excuse me. Good afternoon. I would like to announce the start of the World Island Forum High-Level Roundtable titled Support to Island Countries, Rethinking the Roles of Philanthropy and Other Stakeholders. This event is co-hosted by the Nippon Foundation and the Sasakawa Peace Foundation. I am Maki Vicky Honda, Program Director of the Nippon Foundation, and it is a pleasure to welcome you all here today. At the outset, I am very pleased to introduce to you Mr. Yohei Sasakawa, Chairman of the Nippon Foundation, who will make his opening remarks. それでは日本財団笹川洋平会長、よろしくお願いいたします。
Esteemed leaders of island states, excellencies, and distinguished guests, welcome to the World Island Forum hosted by the Nippon Foundation. I thank you sincerely for your attendance. Founded in 1962, the Nippon Foundation is at the center of an ecosystem of more than 20 sister foundations. We share a common goal, which is to address the challenges society faces through transformative solutions. I call this approach social innovation, where we aim to create lasting solutions to societal issues by tackling and eradicating their root causes. We recognize that no single individuals or organizations can overcome the diverse obstacles we confront worldwide. That is why the Nippon Foundation and its sister foundations continue to work together to further advance social initiatives around the world. Our long-standing commitment for the Pacific Island states began with the international conference we hosted in 1988. Today, the Nippon Foundation and the Sasakawa Peace Foundation continue to work in close collaboration to extend and enhance our cooperation. Today's forum will be a platform to first address the achievements of past initiatives undertaken in collaboration with the Pacific Island states. This will serve as an icebreaker for broader discussions aimed at understanding the urgent challenges these island states face in our rapidly changing world. The main theme of our discussion is the role of philanthropy, specifically what philanthropic organizations and individuals can do to address the unique issues faced by island states. In this dialogue, we anticipate invaluable contributions from their leaders as well as representatives from regional and international organizations such as the United Nations. Sharing each other's pain laid the groundwork for sharing each other's hope, leading us all toward a bright future that we can pursue together. This spirit of empathy, deeply rooted in Japanese culture, is the core principle upheld by the Nippon Foundation and its sister foundations. I believe there is no area where this philosophy is more relevant than in our relationship with the ocean. While there are more than 180 nations in the world, the ocean is singular. Unless we emphasize with the challenges each nation faces, we will be at risk of losing our shared vision for the future of humanity. Thus, I sincerely encourage you to engage in open and constructive discussions with one another for the prosperity of the island states, whose lives are closely linked to the oceans. Let our conversation lead to meaningful actions as we strive toward a future filled with our shared hopes. I am truly honored to have this opportunity to hear your valuable insights. Thank you once again for your participation today, and may our discussions be fruitful for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman Sasakawa, for your opening remarks underlying the significance of this forum in terms of our longstanding partnership with island countries and the forthcoming processes that will foster our collective actions towards achieving sustainable development in island countries and sustainable ocean management. Now it is my pleasure to welcome and introduce to you Mr. Takuma Miyaji, State Minister of the Foreign Affairs of Japan, to make his keynote address. May I invite State Minister Miyaji to take the floor.
Chairman Sasakawa, leaders of the Pacific Island states, honored guests, my name is Miyaji Takuma, and I serve as the State Minister of Foreign Affairs. I'm from Kagoshima Prefecture, and there are 28 islands, and we have a very deep sympathy for the issues that islands carry. And so on behalf of the government of Japan, I'm very honored to be able to give remarks today. The Nippon Foundation and Sasakawa Peace Foundation have continued to engage in discussion with Japan and its regional friends, and have proactively and widely worked for many years through joint efforts on various issues in supporting the Pacific Island states. And I would like to welcome the holding of today's meeting and express my respect for the initiative shown by both foundations. Today, let me address the efforts of the government of Japan regarding the Pacific Island states. The 10th Pacific Islands Leaders Meeting, Palm 10, was held in Tokyo last July. Leaders here with us, as well as the PIF Secretary General, attended, and we engaged in discussion regarding the 7 areas in the PIF 2050 strategy and shared issues between Japan and the Pacific Island states. According to the leaders' declaration adopted by the Palm 10 and the Joint Action Plan, Japan will ensure delivery of our commitments. We have seen drastic change in the international landscape as of late. The Russian invasion of Ukraine, the situation in the Middle East, infectious diseases, and climate change are but some of the global issues which constitute the compound crisis that the international community faces. The environment around the Pacific Islands is also growing in complexity as well. Working with the Pacific Island states that share basic values and rules is crucial in trying to maintain and reinforce open and free international order. With this backdrop, Japan will continue to strongly support the 2050 strategy and regional unity and promote cooperation, and we will continue to listen carefully to the needs of our Pacific Island friends in order to achieve this. In particular, Japan is also an island nation, and we absolutely share the sense of crisis that climate change is the single biggest threat to survival. At Palm 10, Japan announced the Pacific Climate Resilience Initiative. This utilizes Japanese technology, knowledge, and funds to address climate change in aspects such as resilience of disaster preparedness, promoting decarbonization, and support for island state efforts. And these 3 pillars will be addressed as an all-Japan effort. As part of this initiative, we have decided to extend $3 million for the PIF's Pacific Resiliency Facility, PRF. For Japan, working through PRF, we are pleased to contribute to overcoming vulnerabilities and enhancing resiliency of the Pacific Island states that face risks of climate change and disaster. Japan and the Pacific Islands are strongly affected by natural disasters as well, and have helped each other over numerous hardships thus far. Today is the 14th anniversary of the Great East Japan earthquake, and we would like to utilize the lessons learned thus far. And last year, December, Vanuatu was damaged by earthquake, and Japan provided emergency aid as well as dispatching medical and investigative teams. We've also decided last week that restoration equipment will be provided to address the pressing issue of removing debris and supplying water. Using the know-how Japan has accumulated over many disasters, and under the approach of Build Back Better, we intend to promote cooperation so we may contribute to the restoration efforts. Working with private sector efforts as well, as was confirmed at Palm 10, Government of Japan will also work on shared issues with our Pacific Islands friends and strengthen our relationship of striding forward together towards the future. Japan and the Pacific Islands have been linked together with the Pacific Island and our deep historical connection. As far back as the 19th century, there's been people-to-people exchanges, and even before the independence of various states, Japan has built a cooperative relationship with the Pacific Island states. We will also be holding the 2025 Osaka Kansai Expo this year. Through the Pacific Islands National Day, we hope to further deepen our kizuna, our bonds between Japan and the Pacific Islands. POM is held every 3 years, and the next POM is scheduled for 2027, POM 11. Japan will continue to strive forward together with the Pacific Islands and deepen our dialogue with each country as well as with the PIF. I hope that the discussions today will be fruitful for all of those involved. Thank you for your kind attention.
宮地副大臣、ご挨拶をいただきありがとうございました。
Thank you very much, Mr. Miyaji.
For his remarks, highlighting the policy initiatives that the government of Japan has been undertaking up to now and sharing the future perspectives for advancing partnerships, particularly with island countries. Thank you. Now, we would like to move on to the roundtable discussions entitled The Role of Philanthropy in Supporting Small Island Nation, Developing States, or SIDS. The roundtable discussion will be moderated by Mr. Charles Goddard, Editorial Director of The Economist Group. And I would like to hand over the floor to you, Charles.
Welcome, everybody, to this afternoon's session. Let me join Sasakawa-san in warmly welcoming you to this side meeting, in a sense, this associated meeting to the World Ocean Summit 2025. As you just heard, my name is Charlie Goddard. I'm editorial director at Economist Impact, and I run a fair bit of our ocean work. Among other things, and it really is an honor to be invited to address and lead this roundtable along with my trusty partners from Sasakawa Peace Foundation and the Nippon Foundation, Vicky and Masanori here. The sort of purpose of this, as Vicky said a little bit earlier, really is to try and unpack this question of the role of philanthropy in small island states. And to do so, I want to change up the format a little bit from what we had originally planned, to focus on a few things, I think, that really are important. And I was struck particularly in the earlier closed session around a few points that I'll just mention, and I hope I'm not undermining any confidences that were there in the first session, but I think many of these points will be raised again in this session. And the first of those is, what do small island states actually need? And this was something that was raised by a number of participants in that session. And I think the answer to that is not always obvious, and I think it needs to be unpacked in this discussion here. And I think one of the things that was allied to that thought was this sense that not all organizations come to the small island state question with anything but predetermined ideas. Some do come and consult, but many have very clear ideas about what they want to do and perhaps have a lack of consultation in and around the small island states' own needs. So those two things struck me, I think, particularly. And the other thing that I would mention is that small island states feel strongly, at least this is what I was hearing earlier today, that they don't want to be merely recipients of aid, but they actually want to be active partners in designing aid and philanthropy that comes through to them. So with that thought in mind, I've got a simple structure for this session, and really I'm going to ask 3 or 4 speakers just to set the scene for us, and then I'm going to try, on this unusual format, try to have a conversation amongst the other participants around the round table, and then about 20 to 25 minutes from the end, I'm going to ask the audience to join us in making comments or indeed in asking questions of any of the roundtable participants. And I think the format that I'd like to do, the structure that I'd like to sort of address really is, first of all, we're in a changing world. We're in a world where economic shocks caused by particularly changing funding landscapes in the United States require us to think a little bit differently now about the role of philanthropy, and indeed the role of funding more generally, that's coming through to large ocean states, to small island states, and indeed to others in the global south especially. The second, and I want to really just sort of unpack that and ask why, what is the response to that from philanthropy? The second question that I think we want to address is, what is working and what is not working in philanthropic funding for small island states? And we started to talk about that a little bit in the last session, but what we really need to do is be a bit more robust about what those challenges really are and ask ourselves, why are we in this situation where it does appear that quite often outcomes are not always what they potentially should be. And the third part of the discussion, I think, is really how do we look to the future? How do we put the philanthropic question back on the table in a way which meets the needs of small island states in a more meaningful way? And it's not to say that philanthropy that's been given to small island states, and here I make a caveat, hasn't been useful and hasn't been important. It has been. But I think, as we'll hear today in the discussion, there may be new thoughts and new ways about how philanthropy could be more impactful and more meaningful in small island states. So that's the structure of the discussion. I wanted to begin, if I could. We have many distinguished speakers here at the table, and you will notice, obviously, that we have two, very honored to have two presidents with us, President Whips and President Hein. President Whips from the Republic of Palau and President Hein from the Republic of the Marshall Islands. So I'm going to ask both of them if they might speak to those issues first, and then I'm going to have two more speakers give us a sort of a scene setting, and then we're going to have a discussion around the table. Might I turn first, please, to President Whips from Palau. So.
Well, first of all, thank you, Charles, and I want to take this opportunity to thank Chairman Sasakawa and the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, Nippon Foundation, for hosting us, I think, and bringing all these groups together. And good afternoon, President Heine. I think, first of all, with the changing financing and what is going on around the world, I think for us in the Pacific and what we're seeing, especially play out in the United States, it really is a sounding bell reminding us that we need to be accountable for the funding that we use. It needs to be used effectively so that we can show results. And I think more importantly, because taxpayers or demand more from their governments, at times that then results in maybe destruction to programs that are important for our people. And this is really where philanthropy can fill in those gaps, and hopefully we don't destroy what we've already begun. At COP28 a few years ago, Palau, and along with the rest of the Pacific Islands, got together and launched the Unlocking Blue Pacific Prosperity Plan. And that concept was really Pacific-led, but the concept is, how do we, as the Pacific, really design programs that are fit for purpose to meet the needs that we have in the Pacific in the most effective way, giving us the flexibility so these programs be adaptive and meet the needs of, ultimately, what we want to have is healthy oceans, because that's what produces a healthy planet. And we've had examples of programs that work. And, you know, one of those is the partnership that we have with the Nippon Foundation. And what they have done in Palau, getting down in the ground and in the trenches and helping us protect our EEZ, providing programs and support to combat IUU, but then also building capacity and then helping us hosting conferences and bringing people together. These are examples of how philanthropy is working directly to support programs that make a difference. A lot of times in multilateral or through government support, a lot gets tied up in overhead, and it doesn't really reach the ground and hit what needs to be done. And I think that's the important part of having philanthropy in the room, is they can fill in those gaps, they can act quickly to meet the needs, and that is really what's the idea behind the UBBP, is creating a funding mechanism that cuts through the red tape and gets to the needs that people really have to promote sustainability and protection. So.
Thank you, Mr. President. Can I just come back and just ask you quickly, and this may be a sensitive question, but what has been the impact of the, not withdrawal, but suspension of funding for Palau and for other small island states that you know of too?
Well, there's several programs that have been put on pause. And one of those is Palau's initiative on the marine spatial planning, which is so important for our oceans and what we're trying to do, and goes along with what we're doing under the Unlocking Blue Pacific Prosperity Initiative. So we're hoping that we have an opportunity to go back to Washington and say, this is an important program, you saw the importance, let's continue to work together to help Palau in its journey. Because it is important that we have donor support. Otherwise, these initiatives, we can't follow through on them. So having other alternatives, like philanthropy, fill in those gaps is key. Or having this fund, which we're trying to build through the UBPP, allows us to have more flexibility and address those needs. So.
We'll come to UBPP in a moment, because I think it is a really interesting example of a potential strategic way forward. But can I just also ask, Mr. President, whether you feel that, even though structurally you've been thinking about this question for some time, that the cessation or suspension of funding from the United States particularly is going to accelerate this process of thinking in small island states?
I think absolutely, and that's why we need to develop, like the Pacific Resilience Fund, the UBPP. These are other mechanisms to ensure continuity so that programs that we develop really have lasting impacts. And if they're designed by the Pacific, for the Pacific, I think they have the opportunity much more impactful long-term, instead of having outside systems come in and just say, this is what we want, because they think that's what's best for us, versus we're developing what we know is best for us. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. President. Madam President, can I come to you, President Hein from the Republic of the Marshall Islands, and just to have your thoughts about the whole question of the role of philanthropy, particularly in the context of the challenges that have been posed in international funding from the new administration in the United States.
Thank you. Thank you, Charles and Yohei, and Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor to be part of this panel this afternoon and to talk about what do small island developing state needs? That was one of the questions you posed earlier, and there is no question that we have a long list of needs from small island developing states. We're very selective on what we bring to the discussion, especially with philanthropy. And in the context of what's happening in the US and the pooling of funding from our communities, we have to look at projects and programs that would help our communities, not just bring some employment opportunities and create revenues for our communities, but help with the needs that we will identify or we can identify. You asked the question of how could philanthropy be more impactful, and I think in the earlier session today there was discussion on, moving from one-off type of assistance to something that takes place over time and address a broader area of need in a sector area. So in terms of speaking from the Marshall Islands and what we need, we've been looking at how to grow the economy, but at the same time addressing real life needs for the country. So for example, we have big needs in waste management, and so the idea of creating a circular economy is a win-win opportunity for islands like the Marshall Islands. We have very small space to store waste, and so we have to look at how we can develop or how we can create the opportunities, business opportunities, but at the same time address the need. Our marine life and resources are central to our livelihoods, and we're concerned about waste coming into the ocean. So how do we make sure that our communities don't dump their waste into the ocean? What do we do? So as food security depends on healthy marine ecosystem, and sustainable marine tourism is also vital opportunities for us. We have to make sure that our oceans are clean. However, inadequate waste management poses a significant environmental and economic risk. In our communities with limited space designated for waste disposal, waste often ends up in the ocean. So looking at the possible solution, philanthropic organizations can play a crucial role by investing in our circular economy that look at initiatives that transform waste into valuable resources and generate revenue and create jobs at the same time. I think those are the kinds of initiatives we look for so that we can turn trash from green trash, plastic bottle, and metal into some sources of revenue for the community, but at the same time taking care of the waste issue. The other area that I wanted to speak to in this context is sustainable energy. And right now we are using a lot of solar, renewable energy from solar power. And almost all of our communities in the other islands use solar energy, which is good. But in the population center, we're looking at exploring the use of ocean thermal energy generation so that we can harness the possibilities from the depth of our ocean. We understand that ocean thermal energy has been proven to be both technologically and economically feasible. We need partners in this effort, as the venture can be cost intensive. The possibilities for economic spin-offs from something like this is also the interest in this area, because we can create job opportunities and as well as business opportunities for our communities. So we're looking at this kind of venture to partner with interested philanthropy that looks at resolving a problem, but at the same time creating economic generation and job opportunities for our young people. So in looking at what kind of philanthropy and how can we move into this area, these are some examples that we wanted to share. But before closing, I wanted to deeply, express my deep appreciation to Mr. Yohei Sasakawa, chairman of the foundation, Nippon Foundation, for his unwavering commitment to the leprosy elimination efforts in the Republic of the Marshall Islands. He's been assisting us with this, and through both financial and technical support, the Nippon Foundation has played a crucial role in strengthening our capacity to address leprosy and improve the health outcomes of our people. That's one component of health need in the country. There are many other components. We're talking about expanding healthcare to the outer islands. We're talking about addressing non-communicable diseases, building a resilient healthcare system. These are areas that are highly needed, and we could use philanthropic assistance or partnership to make sure that these needs are addressed. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. There's, as you say, a long list of important challenges that are faced by your country and many other small and developing states. Can I just quickly follow up with one brief question, and that is, does obviously the concerns around the funding question in the United States worry you clearly, but what do you feel is the sort of way forward in terms of building a diversity of funding to ensure that there is resilience to future economic shocks?
The two examples I shared are examples where we can generate revenue. Obviously, we need to expand our revenue base so that we're not dependent on one source. And so I think the opportunity to partner with organizations across various sectors is an area that we're looking at. We're also looking to strengthen our partnerships with different countries. And to build up our own economic base using resources that we have locally. And so one of the areas we're looking at right now is looking at technical assistance to assess our economic situation, to look at what we can produce for our own consumption, for example. We import most of our food from outside. For example, eggs, cost of eggs is going up. Why do we not produce our own eggs or chicken or poultry, vegetables? So we're looking at these types of things currently to see how we can produce more of the food and essential items that we need rather than relying on outside sources. It's going to be a lot of work, and it's not going to happen over time, but we have to start somewhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. Can I turn, if I may, to Philemon Manoni, who is the Pacific Ocean Commissioner. I obviously don't want to say too much about what you said in the last meeting, but I did notice that one of the key things that you mentioned was this question of, let's think more clearly about what Pacific Islands themselves need. I wonder if you just sort of expand on that thought a little bit for us here and help us set the scene there. Thank you.
Thank you. I think to be impactful is to understand clearly what the needs of the Pacific are. If you have a look at where we are today, through the wisdom of the leaders, we adopted a 2050 strategy. That is the region's North Star to 2050, with priority thematic areas of work that we have ambition to get there, but how do we turn those ambitions into reality? As you heard earlier from the SG, he was able to collect $3 million today from the government of Japan to go to the resilience facility. So the understanding, the genesis of the PRF is important. It is a motivation by leaders because of the challenge in accessing multilateral funds. So the PRF is sort of a mechanism that the Pacific could utilize to do that. So as the UPP initiative. These are initiatives by Pacific because of this overall access to finance challenge. Then came along the COVID. So now initially the PRF was for community level preparedness, disaster resilience and so forth. So, but now how do we look at the shocks to the economic activities in the islands? So there is a pillar in the PRF that sort of addresses that angle as well. But the point I think is that of course, the Pacific has not been sitting idle. The Pacific has been trying to be innovative, to be transformative with all of these initiatives. But there are still gaps, and there are still partners that we need to come on board to support our effort. Traditional partners, but recently seeing the upsurge in contribution of philanthropic organizations, which is a good thing. We welcome that kind of support. But how do we make that effective? And I think, as I said earlier, rather than planning and coming in and doing things, I think you look at the gaps, as President Whips has emphasized earlier. Where is the niche? Where is the gap that these philanthropic interventions could best serve the Pacific need? If we be strategic in that way, and I think we'll be able to tackle these problems or the needs of the Pacific. The pillars of the UPP initiative that is being worked on in the Pacific, also addressing this type of gaps or niche and targeting those specific needs. So understanding clearly where the needs are, and then together with the Pacific, designing these programs and then implementing these programs together, I think is a more productive partnership, is a better way of working together and moving forward rather than pre-designing projects or programs and then coming to the region with those. So perhaps I will stop there.
Thank you very much, Philemon. I want, if I can, to ask Karina Lyons, who is Director of Partnerships, Integration and Resource Mobilization for the Pacific Community, to just pick up on some of those points, if I may, because I think, as Philemon was saying, there's a real need for a much greater level of consultation and discussion with small island states around these issues. But UBPP is a program that is designed, in a sense, directly, as Philemon was saying, to address that. Could you tell us a little bit more about UBPP and why and what it's trying to do?
Thanks, Charlie, and konnichiwa, Ali Yakwe Kasililie, and Nisa Bulavanaka. Charlie, to be honest, this feels like a performance assessment, or I'm at a board meeting because you're asking me questions in front of my bosses. And for a bit of context, the Pacific Community is an intergovernmental organization owned by the Pacific, and so I'm here as a public servant, speaking on behalf of the 27 governments that operate. And you've asked me a tricky question because it was a surprise, and I'll talk to the leaders afterwards. So unlocking Blue Pacific prosperity, as you've heard so elegantly articulated by the president of Palau, is a response to Pacific needs. It's a strategic attempt to try to catalyze the type of mosaic that we need in the region. You heard from the representative from the Japanese government that they made a very important investment into the Pacific Resilience Facility, which is key. And that is part of the mosaic of investments that we are establishing in the region, and unlocking Blue Pacific prosperity is an attempt to target the private and philanthropic sectors because they're all but absent in the Pacific. For those of you who know about the financial landscape across the development world or climate financing, at a global level, about half of that funding is sourced from the private sector of philanthropic sectors. And in the Pacific, only 4% of our development funds come from philanthropy. So, of course, in the Pacific, we lead from the front and take action. And if I may, Charlie, I think you led with three questions, which I think are pretty important questions to answer. The first was, how can philanthropy respond to a challenging world, which to me was a question of relevance. And I'd like the opportunity to speak to that, given that this is sponsored by the Nippon Foundation. And I think the question of relevance for philanthropy is, how can you play a more strategic and coherent role to ensure that you maximize the impact of your important investment? Which leads to the second question you asked, what is working and what isn't working and I'll answer that from the perspective of the Blue Pacific continent, where I'm lucky enough to live. Because to me, that's a question of impact. You heard from the president of Palau again, the important investment that the Nippon Foundation is making on the ground. And we're blessed with a number of philanthropic partners in the Pacific. And I'm looking at friends like Lizzie from TNC, and there's a whole cohort of people who work with us to help. But in order to really lift the level of ambition and see a transformational impact, I think that two things. Firstly, in order to be strategic in practice, we must take a programmatic approach. That means docking on to a systems-wide programmatic attempt to try to ensure that the whole is bigger than the sum of its parts. And that's exactly what you've heard from our leaders in the closed session and here today. Unlocking Blue Pacific prosperity is one of a number of attempts to do just that. And that which leads to your last question, which was, what next, what now? And to me, that's a question of vision. And we have a vision in the Pacific, and these leaders were, again, leading from the front. That vision is the 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific continent, and I would encourage everybody to have a look. It is extremely ambitious. It's essentially a love letter to our islands, to our children, and to our ocean. How do we ensure that we prosper, not just survive, but prosper through to 2050? So we've got that sorted. The challenge is, how do we operationalize it, and what kind of partners will come with us on that journey to ensure that we accelerate the types of actions and activities that will in fact lead to the transformational shift that we already know that we need. And in the case of philanthropy, they have a special characteristic that enables them to scale the work that we're doing in the region because they can be catalytic, because the funding tends to be flexible, risk-tolerant, agile. And when you put that together with some of the other mechanisms that we're designing in the region, like the Pacific Resilience Facility, a programmatic approach to climate financing, all of the national level programs that all of these leaders are implementing in their countries. Together we can create the kind of mosaic of funding that we need to really cohere these efforts to ensure that we actually achieve results.
There's so many things to come back on, and I obviously want to make sure that everybody else around the table has an opportunity to address some of those things. But So can I just ask you very quickly, what is the time frame that you have on something like this? So just the financing component of that is obviously what's important to everybody around the table, I'm sure. But philanthropy obviously is catalytic, potentially, but what do you see as the steps that you want to take? What is this programmatic sort of strategic vision that you have, and how do you expect to crowd in eventually, I guess, private sector finance?
Now, this really does feel like a performance assessment review. Again, President Whipps and others have asked these direct questions. In terms of timeframes, it's sequenced. So we're racing towards a 2030 deadline, because that is what our countries have agreed to in the context of the CBD, and also because the data is telling us we have to make some bold and transformational steps by that date. And I can hear the scientists in my head telling me about the temperature of the Earth, and we must reach 1.5, and sorry, I need to slip that in there. I'm a money person, sorry. The financial target for the first round of actions that will implement the goals of unlocking, there's 3 goals of unlocking. The first is 100% conservation and management of the Blue Pacific continent in a way that maximizes benefits to Pacific people. So that is driving a 2030 deadline, and the financial target for that is 500 million, right, sir? Yes, 500 million. We have an anchor investment of 114 million, all of which is philanthropic monies. And the challenge is, how do we leverage that so that this is not just the status quo? It's not just a big project where we spend down and then we're in the same position, which leads us to the third goal of unlocking sustainable fit-for-purpose financing. That goal exists in perpetuity, I think. Yeah, I think that's the definition of sustainable. But at least for me, the key performance milestones focus on 2030. We're in a race.
Thank you, Karina. And I think that sets the scene really nicely for, I think, those 4 speakers who've been able to sort of help us think about some of the key issues there. I think I want to sort of, if I can, bearing in mind that we don't have a lot of time and we want to make sure that people in the audience have an opportunity, is to sort of move away from the first question, because I think there are going to be many views about that, but look at those second 2 questions, which all of the speakers so far have spoken a little bit about. And in particular, first of all, just ask this question, is the present mode of philanthropic funding to small island states really working? Or what is working about it, if it is working? And in some cases, it clearly does make a difference, and it's clearly important. And what about it perhaps isn't working so well? And how do we frame that so that it's useful for philanthropic organizations to understand and frame their own funding requirements? So I just throw it out to the floor now, not the floor at the back, if I may, but the floor around the table. We'll come to you in a while, but anybody like to take up that discussion first? Justin, thank you. Could you just
thanks.
mention your name and organization, please? Thanks.
So Justin Robinson, I'm coming from University of the West Indies in the Caribbean. I just want to make a very quick segue back to your first question. So in the Caribbean, what we've seen in our own university is that with the freezing of USAID funding, $10 million worth of funding, mainly in public health, is frozen. So there are critical projects that just can't be advanced. And I see a critical role for philanthropy in providing what I call a sort of short-term emergency response. The world is going through a major shift, with a shift in the US, a multipolar world. As an optimist, I think the world will eventually figure this out, but in the interim, a lot of damage can be done. A lot of vulnerable people can get hurt, and I think it's absolutely critical that philanthropy can step in. I mean, it kind of goes against what we've said, it should be long-term, but I think in this era of shifting global sands, there can be a lot of short-term damage done while nations of the world are figuring out this new environment, and I think there's a critical role for philanthropy to step in and fund some of these critical projects for the most vulnerable in the world while this is being figured out. Now, in terms of what doesn't work, my quick spin on that, I think what works very well is philanthropy targeted at the most vulnerable people in the world. And I think that's very important. I think it gets a bad name, but at the end of the day, what we are focused on is the state of the human condition, improving the quality of life of the most vulnerable. What I'm not sure works as well is building that capacity for innovation. The problems of SIDS are numerous, they are unique, they're very different. I mean, I'm from the Caribbean, our issues are very different in some ways from the Pacific, while similar. So I think philanthropy needs to be focused on building the human capacity and the partnerships that SIDS have the capacity to innovate and address their own issues.
Thank you, Justin. And could you just mention your name? And I almost can't see you down there. Karina, thank you.
I think it works. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So first of all, I'm Karuna Rana, and I'm from Mauritius. I'm the founding director of the Big Ocean States Initiative, BOSSI. Before I address the questions, I really want to say a big thanks to the Nippon Foundation, the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, for having us, but most importantly for putting together this day, which is so important for Big Ocean states, giving us the unique attention and platform that we deserve. So thank you for that. I also want to, on behalf of the Minister of Blue Economy of my country, thank the Sasakawa Peace Foundation for the invite. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it because it's our Independence Day tomorrow, and we're busy welcoming the Prime Minister of India. So I don't represent the government, but I wanted to make sure that I say that. I wanted to address these two questions and also link it to the first question and also to what the professor said from the University of West Indies. The one thing that BOSSI is very keen on addressing as a gap is innovation. And most importantly, as we've heard from President Whips talking about from Pacific SIDS to for Pacific SIDS, we have the same mission, but it's from Big Ocean states for Big Ocean states. We see a clear gap in community-led platforms and initiative around SIDS to address ocean innovation in a way that really is from the community itself. So few issues that I want to put forward on the table is we talk a lot about the missing middle of ocean innovation. How do we finance the missing middle? We don't talk as much about the missing beginning, which is so key for small island developing states or big ocean states. The reality is that national innovation ecosystems are not conducive. We're talking about accelerating, we're talking about scaling, but what about getting started? The reality is that a lot of the innovators on the ground that we have worked with, and we interviewed a few of them last year in the Indian Ocean, and now we're extending this to Caribbean and Pacific and the rest of the African SIDS, is that there is a lack of access to some of the labs, there is a lack of access of funding to just get started, from pre-seed to prototype to market. So we really need to fix the starting line. And there, the philanthropy has a big role to play because VC funding wouldn't work. VC funding is talking about exits, it's talking about scaling, accelerating, things that we are very far from. But that doesn't mean that we can't get there. A big problem with such funding that already exists is that they look at islands like ours and they say we have a small market size. They look at us as small numbers. But I want us to look beyond the numbers. We are small cities, we are pilot labs. I'm very sure that we can transform our lived experiences and traditional knowledge into solutions that can be adopted and replicated all over the world. And that's where the philanthropy would play a big role, is to really move beyond these, the small market size, the perceived risk that they see, but really trust these innovators and giving them the finance, but also the representation and visibility that they need. Representation and visibility is very key if we want innovators to be in platforms like these, and this is a gap that we are trying to fill. I also want to invite the philanthropy to go beyond your network. Very often, philanthropy would go back to the same organizations that they work with. Very often, these are big international organizations rather than locally led organizations that don't receive the funding. There is a lot of invisible gatekeeping that happens, bureaucracy that happens. I would invite the philanthropy to move beyond your networks, to make it easier for locally led organizations to access such type of support, and we'll be very happy to facilitate it. To end this, because I know I don't have too much time, what we are doing at BOSSI as a Pan-SIDS initiative, as I mentioned, we have initiated an innovation mapping for the islands. We are putting together a hub of island-based ocean innovators. It would require a village to provide the support that they would need, but it's a platform that we're launching, the UN Ocean. And I'm hoping to be able to get this kind of to them. I think that's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I just come to you in 1 second, please? And I just want to sort of just ask this point because it was raised in the first meeting, and that is that innovation, and it comes back to the earlier point that I raised, innovation sort of often happens outside of SIDS, and that SIDS are, in some senses, the mere beneficiaries of that. And that was tied to a question about science as well, and the need for science at the local level in SIDS. Is that partly what you were referring to as well?
Yes, I would look at it as two types of science. One is citizen science. There is a lot of citizen science happening on the ground, and a lot of the data collection that is happening from them as well. So citizen science can play a big role in addressing some of these solutions because these are data from the ground. And secondly, which we think of, traditional and modern science and R&D, yes, that is also something we need to look at. We are thinking about it from a South-South cooperation aspect as well, in addition to North-South, whereby, let's say, an innovator in Seychelles doesn't have access to a certain R&D lab. Maybe they could be able to have access of the same in Mauritius. How can we facilitate that? So we could also look at within the region, where can we facilitate access? And yes, science, research and development would play a big role. And there is a lot of it already happening. It's really a question of going from one community to another, from one island to another, to really take these solutions, which often also, as I said, come from citizen science, but also from locally led organizations that are not traditional scientists, but are still scientists in their own right, to bring that from the ground to the top and give them the visibility that they need. Thank you.
Very, very important local knowledge component, which is often overlooked. I do apologize for interrupting for really Luisi. Could you jump in as well? Thank you.
Sure. First of all, I just want to thank the Nippon Foundation and the Sasakawa Peace Foundation for inviting us to this important forum. I'm a founding director of the Caribbean Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency, and one of the things I definitely endorse that everyone has spoken about here is that partnerships are really crucial for success. And while we've been speaking about philanthropy, the truth is there are so many different kinds of philanthropy. Philanthropy actually is a fairly small sliver of the capital market and the funds that we need in our regions to really to de-risk a lot of these projects. The good news is that there are many forms of innovative philanthropy that are emerging, focused on de-risking. So for example, the World Bank through MIGA, which the Japanese government played a pretty seminal role in helping to create, recently advised that they want to quadruple the size of their guarantee facility. And this is really potentially game-changing because the bank and other banks don't have to lend directly necessarily if guarantee facilities are expanded. And so I think one of the things we may want to think about is reframing philanthropy and looking at de-risking as a concept. That's something which would allow innovative funding and innovative financing to flow into our regions and to help solve problems. The other thing I want to flag is that AI is certainly transforming our world, and it's happening
now. And this is something which is really critical in our view to support transformational change and sustainable development. It has a direct impact on financing and philanthropy as well. And so this is something that perhaps we and the Nippon Foundation and Sasakawa may want to look at in terms of bringing best practices to our regions insofar as AI is concerned.
Thank you. I do apologize for getting your name wrong there. I haven't had my glasses on, Robert Wright. Thank you very much. Melissa Walsh, if you just sort of tell us your association and affiliation.
Thanks, Charles. Melissa Walsh. I'm with the Ocean Risk and Resilience Action Alliance. And I wanted to pick up on exactly what you said. And to your question, Charles, about what's working and what isn't working, the two things that come to mind for me on this are listening and leverage. So when it comes to philanthropy and what's working, it's when they listen and when they put their money to work through good leverage. And what we've heard from our Pacific leaders and what Karina has echoed is that there is a vision, and the Pacific is, and other regions are, have strategies in place for what to do, but we can't rely on just this treadmill of asking philanthropies to give grant after grant after grant. It's not working. But there are strategies in place to leverage that. And this de-risking is exactly, I think, where we need to go. So if you put $1 into a grant, you're going to get a negative 100% return. You're not going to get it back. But those philanthropic dollars can then be put on the table to test new models, to see what works, and to put in patient capital, risk-tolerant capital to see what works, prove what works, and then be able to take that to the private sector. And that is where you get the true leverage, is when then you're going to be able to bring in the private sector. Thank you.
I mean, just to expand on that, if you could, I mean, it does seem like it's going to be a long haul to get the private sector interested in investing in small island states. I mean, could you sort of, and this is something that Karina was also talking about, could you just expand a little bit on how you think these approaches, with philanthropy being potentially catalytic in this, how these could actually sort of work themselves through such that private capital would in fact be interested?
I think this goes back a little bit to what President Hines said, which was about systematic change, and it's about circular economy. And when we think about what works in getting the private sector interested, it has to be real deals at a benchmark size that they're interested in. And so that's when we need to be looking at which sectors in the real economy can also have a positive impact on communities and the ocean environment. And there's a matching that happens here. And so the private sector might not ever be truly interested in marine protected area enforcement. However, if it's a systematic approach and you're saying, well, here's how we transform the whole system, and part of that has return-seeking capital, and part of it is never going to make money, but as a whole, you need these bits to allow for these bits, I think that's when you start to get to the aggregate size. And yeah, that takes time. So it takes patience, and it takes philanthropy to sort of prove that this can work.
Is the role of philanthropy, as Robert said, really to de-risk that process? Because it seems to me that that's quite a large ask from philanthropy. Elizabeth, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chairman Sasakawa, and for having us here. Charles, thank you, Excellencies. It's an honor to be at this table with so many brilliant friends and colleagues. And I'll just say, I think there is a huge role of philanthropy. We've been talking about de-risking, but in blended finance to create a safe space for private sector to come alongside. And I think we also have some great examples now, like the Global Fund for Coral Reefs that TNC is partnering with across the Pacific and also in Indonesia and in the Caribbean. And I think what we're really seeing is a shift from one-off projects to helping to support sustainability initiatives alongside conservation initiatives. I've been in conservation at the Nature Conservancy for about 22 years now, and I've seen a huge shift in the role of philanthropy in that time. And what I'm seeing now is much more collaborative partnerships where philanthropies are coming alongside each other. But instead of leading the agenda, they're really turning towards countries to set the vision and the agenda. And that's something that I'm proud of. It's a long time coming. I think UBPP is a fantastic example of Pacific Islanders coming together, developing a collaborative vision, and then having the philanthropy come alongside to help support. I think the danger of that sometimes is when you have a large group of philanthropies together, there's a tremendous power there. And so there's a danger in pushing or shifting an agenda. So I think it's vital for the islands to continue to drive that vision forward and make sure that they are really leading and that the philanthropies are really coming alongside in support of. But I feel like we're moving in the right direction. And I think with UBPP, I think there's an opportunity now to really align some of the existing priorities of the Pacific. So I think we're looking at how we can see synergies between things like the Micronesia Challenge, UBPP, so that philanthropies are driving towards a harmonized set of priorities as opposed to pushing in different directions. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Sanjay, Minister, and then Sanjay, please.
Thank you, and Stephen Victor from Palau. I just want to share some perspective because I worked for an NGO for quite a long time, and now with the government. There's always the perception from the governments that NGOs are bad partners because they come and drive agenda. But I think what led us to really focus on developing the Unlocking Blue Pacific prosperity is the recognition that when we don't have that set vision, someone will come in with resources and drive that vision. So we needed to set a vision for the Pacific that invites investors to come in and invest in a co-designed process. So I think that's one thing that I would say with regards to philanthropic foundation is there is a need for governments to engage more proactively with philanthropic entities to ensure that there's alignment in priorities. I think Nippon Foundation is probably the only foundation that I know works directly with governments. Other foundations have to work with third party. And so I think that's really what needs to change is government being proactively engaging with philanthropic foundations to make that bridge and to set priorities and to set what is impactful for not just the oceans, but for the people. I think in the Pacific, much of the philanthropic money focused on conservation because that's what they see, but I think investing in human capital is just as important as investing in the resource itself because we need to build the next generation of leaders who maintain that vision. And so investing in both is critical to ensuring that we put something durable and robust for the oceans and for the Pacific. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. Sanjay.
Yes, thank you. Thanks to the Nippon Foundation and the Sasakawa Foundation and Chairman Sasakawa-san, thank you so much. You know, the challenge, I should also mention the Economist, by the way. It's a big reason we're here. The challenge with philanthropy, there's just not enough of it. I mean, it's a drop in the ocean, quite literally. And if you then look at what the island states are receiving, it's the smallest of the smallest slice of the pie. So if you look at wealth in the world and you look at the growth of private wealth in the world and compare it to the growth of philanthropy in the world, wealth has gone like this and private philanthropy has gone like that. You know, so I'm the CEO of Conservation International, and I sort of joke with my board that if the board members just gave us shares of their companies and the same number of shares over the 35-year history of this organization, we would probably be 10 times bigger. And that just really proves this, you know, philanthropy just hasn't kept up scale. Now, is that going to change? Outside of present company, and I'm deeply grateful for what the foundations in this room are doing, But outside of the present company, I don't think that is really going to change that much. It might change some, won't change dramatically. And the notion that American private philanthropists or European philanthropists are going to pick up where government is stumbling, that's not going to happen, because they do not want to signal that they're there to take over government responsibility, right? I'm hearing this right now from philanthropists, and I'm sure you are as well, in the US. So we have to ask ourselves, how do we best use philanthropic dollars? And it comes to what Karina and you and others were saying about de-risking. You know, people who have made their money taking big, big bets become very scared when it comes to protecting nature or investing in public good. They want very safe returns. They want to know they're giving $1 and they want to put one kid through school, or they're giving $1 and they want 1 kilometer of ocean protected. And this notion that even though they have made their own wealth, doing all sorts of things that most of us, normal humans, would find extraordinarily challenging and risky in our own personal lives. So we have to find a way to change this message and really get this message across that, you know, we understand philanthropy is going to grow but not grow enough, but the de-risking of it is going to be critically important. You know, I'll give you one example, a real example that we worked on to bring funding to Pacific Island nations through the Green Climate Fund. So just a couple of weeks ago, we helped bring in about $107 million from the Green Climate Fund to 14 Pacific Island countries for tuna, to look at climate change and tuna and how tuna are migrating and changing their migration because of climate change. It took us 3 years to develop that proposal, and over 2,000 pages of documentation. 14 countries had to agree to this. The money is coming through SPC to the countries, of course. But for us, a small, relatively small organization, we had to come up with $3.5 million of private philanthropy in order to get that 100 million plus delivered. And there was a risk any time along the pathway that, you know, countries would object or this wouldn't happen. At the very end, you know, about a year before we were done, we ran out of money. We literally ran out of money. And I had to make a call, in this case, to the Minderoo Foundation, some of you know them, to ask for $400,000 just to keep going. Now, the good news is it worked. We got the funding and it happened. But it could have also not worked, in which case I wouldn't be talking to any of you over here, and you would have, you know, you would have said, yeah, the conservation organizations, what are they doing with all this money? So, you know, you have to be able to take risk. We have to be able to talk to philanthropists and with governments to understand that risk and really to think about funding in that way. And the last thing I would mention is industry. So, you know, a few folks mentioned this about, you know, growing the domestic industry in the Marshall Islands, for example, Madam President. But, you know, think about tuna and think about the value that it's providing to island nations. And to be really able to leverage private philanthropy, we need industry at the table. Because without that, that's where the big money is, right? And you know, it doesn't matter how much we as conservationists go to a Pacific Island nation and say, you know, here's money, protect your ocean. In the long run, they have to be able to balance economic development for their people. I come from Sri Lanka. I was just in Sri Lanka. I'm seeing what's happening in Sri Lanka and the government really trying to balance nature conservation with the economic needs. And the economic needs are severe. And so you have to be able to understand that. And the only way we can make that work is we have the private sector, the private industry at the table as well. Thank you.
I think that's an excellent example, by the way, the one with GCF, of trying to crowd in, using philanthropy to crowd in the big dollars. Always difficult from GCF particularly, but actually pretty similar with many other MDBs and other similar institutions. Can I come to Willie Luisi?
Thank you. I'm Willie Luisi from the Kingdom of Tonga, non-government organization. I'm the founder and the president. The government of Tonga and also the Kingdom of Tonga are so grateful for the $3 million that you granted yesterday for the fifth, yesterday for the Secretary General, and I want to acknowledge that. because as you know, the blessings of the hub is going to be built in Tonga. I want to take this in one area. I'm an international artist. And let me give you my vision and how I see the philanthropist on this occasion. There's the finance is not my area, but I'll give you what Ebeli Hauofa said. The ocean does not divide us, it's uniting us all. So our differences is unifying us. I am here to giving you something that all of you are looking for. Last year, I had the opportunity to launch the Well Corridor concept note during the Pacific Island Forum in Tonga with the support of the previous government in Tonga. And that idea is to safeguard it, the newborn whale calf from Tonga back to Antarctica. It's a safe passage. The vision that I have is beyond of the safeguarding the new whale-born calf from Tonga. It's to become a space that the world will agree as an inclusive space for no-go zone for the Pacific Moana prosperity for the 2050. So there are kind of ideas that we have. So this year, I'm hosting the top brain that I have, and I'll be inviting some of you to bring your solution of the ocean. What can you do? So pretty much, as an artist, of a visionary, it's bringing us all together. The philanthropists, I can see this. Your gift on this time of changes in the world, you are bringing something that I could say is a financial inner engineering of the new financial hub for how the AI will survive together with us of human beings, to become being human together, because all of this, no one can do it alone. So we need everyone, because we are part of the problems. But we also need that we become the solution base of this. So my wishes is this: make Tonga as an exemplar, because you have 16 spaces in the Pacific. We have a kingdom in Tonga. So recently, I just came from Wollongong University. I went and asked if there are technologies which is developing in Australia for circularity economy for the Pacific, the ocean waste. They can bring that into Tonga, so that we can exemplifying what you are impounding, what you're expounding as well for communities. I don't have any money. I have great fingers. So I asked them, in order to come up with $5 million, I asked them, simple thing, can I bring the plastic out of Tonga so that you can do your work here while I'm looking for the money? Yeah? They accepted that. So I'm after this, I'm grateful that my dear friend Masanori invited me to be here. So I'm taking this time to giving you all. We cannot do this alone. We need to come together. But let Tonga to become an exemplar as a small space for the plastic pollutions and all of this circularity economy. I'm an artist. I can make an earring worth $50 US. In Tonga, we have 75,000 arriving on cruise ships. Imagine how much that money can happen for us and our people in Tonga.
Can I?
That's all I'm going to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I just want to, if I can, just bring the discussion sort of back to this question of what the next steps are before we then sort of ask the audience to give their perspectives and make observations and indeed ask questions of people here as well. And what is it, I mean, we've heard a number of different views about what potentially the next right steps are. We've heard about what the UBP is doing, the strategic vision it has. We've heard about the idea that we need to reframe philanthropy, looking at de-risking, particularly as a focus area for philanthropy. We've looked at the question of partnerships and how partnerships are essential. Of course, those present lots of political challenges, even between small island states, but also between small island states and others. And we're going to come to Amanda, but in a second. But I think if we can just sort of think about how do we frame the next steps as a number of organizations are trying to do, and what does that potentially look like? But Amanda, before I ask you all to think about it, you can have a think about that for a moment. Amanda, over to you. Could you just say your affiliation as well, please? Thanks.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so I'm Amanda Ford. I'm from the University of the South Pacific. I'm a marine scientist there. Before I answer, I would like to express my gratitude to the Nippon Foundation and the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, and for everyone on this panel for their incredible input and this really great discussion that's been had so far. So I'm going to just add in some thoughts that I've got from an academic perspective based on what's been said already. So we obviously do a lot of capacity building at the university. We've got the University of the South Pacific, for those that don't know, is owned and governed by 12 Pacific Island countries. It's hugely important for contributing to the development of professionals throughout the Pacific region. We offer in marine sciences undergraduate, postgraduate, and professional development opportunities, both in marine science and marine management. And one thing that's really important to us, of course, is scholarships, giving students opportunities to come and study, to continue their studies, and also opportunities for mobility for them to move outside of the Pacific and get experience elsewhere, to then bring those skills back to support them in their future back in the region. So scholarships and funding for scholarships is something that I'd really like to highlight as something I see as being hugely valuable, and also funding for building capacity also in professional workers and people, for my example, in fisheries and Ministry of Environment, to enable them to also be more empowered in collecting data, in understanding impacts that they're experiencing. Now, this leads me to something that is always a problem to bring up, and people like to avoid it, but we've got really significant data gaps in many SIDS. And this is a limitation when it comes to bringing issues to the table with regards to climate change, to plastics. And so I think funding to be directed towards data collection and building capacity of partners in country and early career researchers to develop skills to gather that data is really important. And that will only strengthen the already very strong voices for the Pacific that we've got in these global negotiating spaces. For example, one of those cases, we've got some brilliant voices that are fighting for the Pacific in the global plastics treaty negotiations, but they're always looking for data to back up their argument, because we've got very little data available to actually show the scale of the problem, particularly in some of the smaller places. One of the projects we've got in Tuvalu, for example, this is the first data that they've ever had gathered. So I think funding being directed towards data collection would be also really valuable. And that not only to understand the impacts that small island developing states are experiencing, but also then to monitor the impact of the interventions that are funded, and to see how they can be adapted and changed as required based on how impactful they've been. So coming back to the transformational impact and the 2030 goals that were mentioned earlier, I think to really make a transformational impact in places like the Pacific, scholarships for young leaders and for ocean professionals, and opportunities for mobility of early career professionals and academics, and also funding to support data collection will be really fundamental in allowing these islands, countries to reach, or to make a sustainable, impactful 100% conservation and management of the Blue Pacific and other areas as well. So that's my main points. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. And I think you're sort of expressing in a little bit more of a sort of clear way one of the key issues that sits here, and we've been talking about, all of us, and that is capacity and the long-term development of a comprehensive capacity in SIDS and among SIDS countries as well. I'm going to wait for the last question, if I may, because I realize that it would be great to have some input from the audience. And just to hear your thoughts, your observations, and indeed if you have questions for anybody here, we would really like to hear from you. Somebody will come round, my colleague Avashi will come round with a microphone. Please, if you could just say your affiliation, your organization, your name, and try and keep it reasonably brief, if you can, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Gunther Pauli. I'm the author of the book, The Blue Economy, which is followed by 23 countries with a ministerial post and adopted by the United Nations. We have something that's called donor fatigue. They're tired, and we're not going to expect them to jump in for American government not paying. It will not happen. But I think also this is the opportunity to change the strategy. I know a lot of the islands on site. I've just arrived from Bali. I will be going to Palau next week. And we know that today, a lot of the money is going to what we in finance call OPEX and CAPEX. It's just filling the gap of an immediate capital investment that's required and covering the operational cost. It's the typical ferry ship that then needs the fuel in order to have the people move around. It's not going to make a difference. We need to have a fundamental shift towards asset building, building up assets. That's where the difference is. Because assets will give you leverage in financing. Give you one example. Palau, 1943, the Japanese studied for more than 10 years the traditional Palauan medicine. It is the best medicine in the world that we know. Smithsonian confirmed it. It's the best medicine against venereal diseases. I don't want to talk about these diseases, but it's a reality. The biodiversity is offering that. That means we can leverage biodiversity to build assets. I can entertain you for a long time about those other opportunities, but this is really where we need to focus on. Build assets, stopgap CAPEX and OPEX expenditures, and go really for the building of the assets. I'm finishing and will be presenting a book called Pristine Palau next week in Koror in Palau, and I think this is where the focus, and that's the message, build assets. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bill. A round of applause. I think that's a very appropriate set of comments. Anybody else would like to, I might even come and ask somebody if you're not going to jump in at the moment, but anybody else like to make comments from the floor? I am going to, and he's looking at his phone at the moment, I'm going to ask Torsten Thiele, who I think could offer us some thoughts, sorry Torsten, offer us some thoughts around this question of how potentially to scale up from philanthropy to broader levels of investment into small island states, what that sort of pathway might look like.
Thank you very much. And indeed, I was noting the build assets message because I think it's integrating these various components that we heard about. Philanthropy as being part of that catalytic finance process that draws in other actors, that draws in other narratives around assets and nature as an asset class that we are building, but that also draws in the concept of blue infrastructure, of how these different interventions jointly improve, protect the coastscapes and the seascapes, so that the larger opportunities can be jointly created that help private investment in a context of improving the nature positive economies of small island, large ocean states. And that is a massive opportunity. And so philanthropy, and I'm picking up on your point about taking more risk, philanthropy should be the riskiest end of this process because it does not require the return. But the philanthropists that do look for returns can look at that broader spectrum, engage more on the impact investing and the patient capital component. So it's that interaction here, and that's why I'm so happy to hear these different perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you, Torsten. And I might just, if I can, and I do apologize, Ilana Said, Ambassador for Palau at the UN, and also now the chair of AOSIS, to just give us a perspective, a slightly wider perspective, because we've talked about partnerships, we've talked about the need for collaboration, and I think earlier you were saying that there was a need to co-design amongst states the strategic vision that would allow philanthropy and other investment to come into small island states. I wonder if you'd just comment a little bit about the relationship between things like UBPP and the broader OASIS agenda that might be out there as well.
Thank you, Charles. Yes, I think in June of last year, the UN had adopted the Antigua and Barbuda Agenda for SIDS, and this is a 10-year strategic framework for sustainable development of small island developing states. One of the key pillars of that is sustainable, enduring partnerships. And it's really trying to pivot the old paradigm that developing countries just take instruction and aid from developed countries. We see that there's challenges to how that's worked in the past. And so the new shift is how do we co-create things together? A lot of the large countries have programs and solutions that are not appropriate for small islands, just given population sizes and capacity constraints. So I think initiatives like the UBPP, which is Pacific-led, is really to try to put us in the driver's seat. We understand our countries, we understand our constraints. How can we work together with our partners, both philanthropic and public partners, to come together to design something that works for us? And then how do we take that and catalyze it with private partnerships as well as private funding as well. So I think with Karina, we have a workshop later this week that will attempt to bridge that gap with philanthropic money, public money, and then how do we take that to the private markets to increase the scale that will allow it to continue going forward. Thank you.
I know, if I could just sort of follow that up, and I know you do speak to a lot of governments, and I just wonder if you could tell us what you think, from a receptivity point of view, governments are they evolving, are they changing, are they respecting the potential strategic evolution that we're starting to see amongst small island states around what they want to see governments engage in? Are you noticing that within governments that you speak to? Because I know you speak to a lot of them.
We are. I think within the SIDS kind of partnership framework, there are certain governments that have been involved with SIDS development for a very long time, and we see that they are listening. I think the change comes a little bit too slowly, in our opinion. I think I've been at this job at the UN for almost 4 years now. We talk about access to finance as a challenge, and that's been a really slow thing to change. But I think they're starting to listen, that we have the Pacific Resilience Facility, we have UBPP. These are initiatives that we've created to try to address some of those gaps, and so some of our partners are coming in to fund those now, in addition to try to do the larger reforms of the World Bank, the Green Climate Fund, and so on. So that reform work takes a lot longer because it's just a little bit more complicated. But they are listening to us in the sense that they are coming in and supporting some of the work that is small island-led.
Thank you, Ilana. Sorry to throw that at you. There's a question, there's a thought or a question just behind you. Thank you. If you could just say your organization and your name, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I am Susana Wangai-Nambete. I come from Fiji, and I represent Conservation International. I wish to acknowledge the in-depth and very enlightening comments from the floor. And I would like to perhaps share how communities think about this. In our work in the Pacific, particularly in Fiji, we work a lot with local communities, and to the point that was raised, community science is very important. We listen to the communities, and in terms of community sciences, the community have a lot of innovative ideas on how they can address the challenges of climate change, the challenges of economic well-being that they aspire to. However, in many cases, they don't have the capacity to access financing. So that in itself is a big barrier to a lot of Pacific Island countries and a lot of Pacific Island communities in accessing financing to help them help themselves. Perhaps a lot of us in Fiji especially would joke about our landowners. They are resource rich, but capital poor. So perhaps that's something that I would like to bring to this conversation for consideration. I do note what Melissa has said, that philanthropies need to listen, and not only listen, but leverage how they can assist the communities and countries trickle down the funds that they receive to local communities. And I think it's very important in these kinds of conversation to always bring back the cap of local communities and how we can filter that funding from philanthropists, from funders, GCF, GEF, and many others, to perhaps regional organizations through working very closely with international and local NGOs that are operating in countries that really will deliver the impact at the ground level. At the end of the day, I'm sure we all want impact. At the end of the day, I'm sure we all want to help those communities that are really aspiring to, but not being able to do it, do what needs to be done in order to help themselves mitigate and respond to the challenges of climate change. Vinaka.
Thank you very much. Other thoughts on the floor? Down in the left-hand side. Vashi, just down on the left. Just raise your hand again. Oh, yeah, there we go. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Sarah Champion. I'm a Member of Parliament in the UK. And I think I'm going to take on the role of the baddie in this meeting, so I apologise for that, and it's not personal. I'm here because I chair the International Development Select Committee, and everything that I've heard today I fully support. But I think we need to be realistic that in the last 50 days the world has turned completely, and I don't think going forwards that there is going to be aid and support just because it's the right thing to do anymore. I think we need to be, or rather you need to be, looking at this from a very different point of view. I've been very disappointed in the last 5 years. My government has cut the aid 4 times. You've seen what's happened in the US. I know that that's starting to happen in other European countries again. So I don't think it's about the money not being there. I think it's about how you position yourselves strategically to make yourself an asset for these governments, and I'm sorry to speak in such blunt terms. I would also say look beyond the money. So for example, in the UK, our aid funding has gone to such an extent that it's almost non-existent now. But what we still do have is convening power. We still have expertise. We can still negotiate. Get yourselves seats on the table. You know, it's great that Canada gifts you a seat but on the World Bank, but you need seats of your own. You need countries like GB to be saying that you deserve your place on that table, and for them to be bringing financiers to you to show you what you're doing. And I think for the next 18 months, I think the US money has gone. Hopefully it will come back again. But I think you're going to start seeing other countries of the world taking that pattern. So reposition yourself. This is a marketing opportunity, and put yourself so that you're essential to all of these organizations going forward.
So that's a fairly stark message.
Sorry, it's reality.
I have to say, and I think we'll all have our views about what governments should and shouldn't be doing around that, but it's not about my view. I just wonder if I can ask some of our panelists to respond to that perspective. Robert.
Well, through you, Chair, just to address the question that you posed, which is next steps, and just to give some feedback on what we've been hearing. I would strike a more optimistic tone, because the truth is that philanthropy has been a very, very small sliver of the financing as a whole that we need, and certainly even financing from the United States has been certainly in the Caribbean, minuscule. If you look at financing from foundations to the Caribbean, for example, it's just less than 1%. And of course, US financing, while it's very important and we'll miss it, isn't the only source of funding available. So to your point, I think we need to change or reframe and market our needs in a different way. And what do I mean by that? There has been over the last decade or more a kind of a democratization of financing and of capital. And what do I mean by that? If you look at crowdfunding platforms, for example, you can raise even a small island with a relatively unknown organization with the right partners can raise hundreds of thousands of dollars and millions of dollars in debt and grant funding on these platforms. These platforms are available in every major developed country in the world, but we're not familiar and we don't speak the language, so we're not able to avail ourselves of that. But to answer your question, I think in terms of next steps, we need to look at success, what has succeeded, and how we can scale that. And there are some really great examples of success that could be scaled and could really deliver solutions. And I'll give one small example from Jamaica, my country. We had our government invest in renewable energy in a very significant way, and they owned all of our wind farms initially. And then they listed that company on the stock exchange, and within a day, it was completely sold out. And now we have owners, as ordinary Jamaicans and institutions that now own that wind farm through the stock exchange. So that has been democratized. So I think there are some opportunities across the board to really have a more egalitarian and inclusive ownership and investment, and it does require some innovation. It does require, thinking outside of the box, but it's eminently possible to do.
Thank you. Other thoughts from the floor? Thank you. Just down here, please.
Thank you very much. I'm Professor V.N. Atri, Director, Indo-Pacific International Center for Indo-Pacific Studies, Kurukshetra, University of Kurukshetra, India. I think the fact is that in ocean economy, SDG 14, the requirement of investment globally is 175 billion per year, and what we are getting around 75 billion per year. So there is a gap of 150 billion US dollar. So the issues basically in all the seeds are the same. And I remember in 2012, when there was a conference of the United Nations Sustainable Development in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. So the seeds gathered together raised the issue that you are talking about the green economy, why don't you talk about the ocean economy, the blue economy? So I think the issue is that if you take the size of the small countries, the geographical size is very small, population is very small. So the finance or the help, the financial help, the support which they are getting from the Nippon Foundation or other foundation is crucial, that cannot be denied. But what is important, that is the capacity building. I was there in Indian Ocean Rim Association, IORA, as Chair Indian Ocean Studies for 6 years. So all the 6 seeds in Indian Ocean region try to ask me that, Professor Atri, how to get money, how to get financing, either from the World Bank or other organization, just to start innovative thinking, just to do capacity building. And I think one question which is very important, despite all this aid, how far this aid has been able to energize the local communities. That is a matter to be studied, you see, in all the seeds. To what extent the local communities have been energized, you see. And that will provide the answer. And I think I agree with all the suggestions made here in the panel. So what we need, it is a collaborative, holistic approach for the solution of the seeds. And I also do believe that the seeds are greatly affected by the ocean, and if you want to implement the ocean economy in real sense, that starts from the seeds. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I know Alfredo Giron would like to make a couple of comments, just a little bit further back, thanks.
Hello. Thanks very much. Alfredo Giron, the head of Ocean at the World Economic Forum. I think that the important work here is, especially in today's context, is catalytic. And I think that for a very long time, and we all have been part of this, philanthropy has operated in a way that sets up its own strategy, its own ambitions, and then goes out there to see where does that strategy fit? What are the things that will help to move the needle in the particular directions? And it's not only ocean, it's basically all across. And I think that in today's world, doing that in such an inward-looking way is probably missed the most important catalytic components. So just to give you an example, at the World Economic Forum, we launched 1 year ago almost now, a little more, the Giving to Amplified Earth Action initiative. And so that's Gaia. And what it does, the slogan is that it tries to catalyze for peace, philanthropic public-private partnerships. And really the point of many of the philanthropies that came to the forum to try to do this was you have access to many of the largest companies in the world, and when we are trying to activate them, we are finding a wall. Or we are able to do it with one, but not with a whole sector. Can you help us to curate some of those dialogues? So we are trying, and just to give you one particular example, right now we are working with the government of the Philippines in the coal to renewables transition. And really some of the questions that the industry had were really basic, quote, quote, in the sense that the answers were not there, but it didn't feel like the responsibility of the private sector to answer those questions for the governments. And the government had so many other priorities that it was not really something that they were going to invest, at least not today, on. So the role of philanthropy was to hire a team to answer some of those questions and then ensure that the private sector was brought along the whole way. So I think examples like that are what could give us what are some of those next steps? I also really appreciated Sanjan's example with the GCF. I know that TNC has been doing an amazing job with the guarantees to unlock bigger things. So catalytic for me is the key word, and we need to be looking for those examples in closed doors many times.
Thank you, Alfredo. We have two comments coming from here. You, sir, please, first, if you can, and then Minna Epps from IUCN. Thank you. If you could just say your name and affiliation, please.
Thank you very much, Charles. My name is Ronan Long. I'm the director of the Sasakawa Global Ocean Institute at the World Maritime University, and I just would like to address one particular question which was put to the round table as well as the floors, which about what to do next. And I think in this context, SIDS took a really strong leadership role at the BBNJ negotiations. This is the first multilateral instrument where we have a specific place for SIDS in terms of the institutional structures, decision-making, as well as in relation to the financial mechanism. It requires one issue, and that's ratification. And I would plead with those present in the room today to, shall we say, assert the leadership of SIDS that we've seen over the last 10 years in those negotiations, to ensure when the instrument comes into force that they're in control of those subsidiary bodies, and very much in relation to the financial mechanism. We're actually delivering a workshop on Thursday here at the Ocean Summit on the BBNJ agreement and SIDS, which is workshop is supported by Ireland, which has a very specific strategic program to support SIDS. So thank you very much for that point of information.
Thank you very much. Minna Epps from IUCN.
Thank you very much. Yes, Excellencies, and all courtesy observed, as Peter Thomson would say, who's not here. Can you hear me? This works? Okay, thank you very much. My name is Minna Epps. I'm the Global Ocean Director with IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature. I would like to say that it's been really insightful to listen to all the comments. Would really kind of agree of what has been said. I'm not an economist. I'm actually a marine biologist, so I work in conservation, in ocean conservation, in the political conservation arena in terms of the science to policy interface. And I also like us to maybe a few considerations as we talk about, absolutely, we've heard it, there's not going to be enough grants. We need the catalytic that you were speaking to so nicely and about de-risking. And I think by the end of it, we say there is money, there is a lot of money, but there's not enough bankable projects. So maybe we need to sit together and to look at what is that ticket item or sweet spot for the different levels, and maybe really come up with a key bankable index for bankable projects that we can then move forward. And we all need to work together. We are seeing the large NGOs working together. There's lots of convenience, et cetera, happening. But one thing that comes to mind as I hear this a lot, where it seems like people are obsessed about bringing things to scale and basically scaling things up financially. My concern, again, putting back my conservation hat as marine biologist, is really how do we maintain a positive correlation between the impact as we scale up on our kind of finances. That's one. And the other thing for consideration is we talk about different sources of capital that we have. And I do want to be, again, coming back to the question of equity that comes into play for everything. I mean, you can take the high seas and fishing and you can bring in equity. That would change the rules of the game. But also think about, somebody mentioned AI really on the rise. And where is the equity in AI? So what is the future labor markets going to look like for MPAs, for example? And how do we bring equity into that and invest that kind of human capital as well? So just, you know, as we get too carried away with scale, let's remember to protect our greatest assets, the blue natural capital. Thank you.
Thank you, Minna. I'm just going to come quickly to one person, Sanjay, on the panel, and then I'll come to you. Yeah, Sanjay.
Sure, and just in terms of your sort of ask about what are we taking away from this, you know, it's easy in this moment to feel quite depressed about the state of the world and the state of the oceans and the fate of small island nations in navigating all this. And I completely agree with you for the comments you made about the UK government and what it reflects the growing trend. I would really urge us not to go down that path of feeling overwhelmed by what's in front of us. We were always a small band of individuals. You know, many of us got into this because we were crazy in love with nature and had some deep passion or deep personal, you know, connection to trying to save what we wanted to save. The fact that we can be in this room today and have such thoughtful commentary from such a variety of folks here today, every single one of these comments has been really insightful, really deep thinking. It certainly gives me a lot of hope that this tribe, this small tribe, is actually growing. And it now involves world leaders, it involves journalists, it all involves civil society, it involves foundations, and that really must give us hope. Look, even in the 1960s when, you know, USAID was created, it wasn't created because the United States suddenly became generous. They certainly weren't richer then than they are today. It came because there was a war going on from thoughts and minds between the United States and the Russians. And it was basically the space war, you know, the race to the moon, but now, you know, on the ground. I grew up in Sierra Leone. I remember aid coming in from the United States and Great Britain, but also from Russia. So we are moving into a multipolar world. There'll be different reasons why countries will want to support the work that's happening in the small island states. I think the things that we want to keep in mind is that from a value perspective, you cannot get greater value in terms of land impact, water impact, than you're going to do in the Pacific. Amongst the leaders of these nations, you control most of the planet with your EEZs. You have enormous leverage and voice if you can speak, as you're starting to do much more, with one voice and one vision. I think the idea about assets that Gunther, you and others raised is absolutely right. It's redefining what it means to invest in an asset rather than just fill in the gaps and spackle up the holes in the boat, right? That idea has to be there. It's about risk-taking and pushing philanthropy, the little philanthropy that is available, to take risk and co-design projects. And then lastly, we got to have industry at the table. So if there's one pot of money that still is floating around out there that can invest, I mean, you think about the balance sheet that TSMC must have, or that Apple must have. I mean, the extraordinary balance sheet. What are they investing in? How do they put that money to work? The one thing I know is an absolute truth. Nature tomorrow will be more valuable than it is today. Your ocean EEZ will be more valuable tomorrow than it is today. I don't know what the curve is, but I know it's true. And if that's true, surely this is an investable asset for the long run.
Thank you. Karina, I'm just going to come to you in a minute if I can, but I just want to have one more comment from the floor, from a lady, yes, there, and then we're going to just have 2 or 3 people from around the table just make some concluding remarks, if you can, and then we have to wrap up. But, thank you. Yes, over to you.
Thank you so much, and it's hard to follow such an impassioned intervention, but it may be an appropriate one as well. My name is Nilüfer Oral. I'm director of the Center for International Law at the National University of Singapore, but I wear another hat, and that is a member of the International Law Commission at the United Nations, where since 2019 we have been working on sea level rise. And this is a matter of great critical importance, I would say, for the small island states. And like in BB&J, as my dear friend Professor Ronan Long said, they have been really taken great leadership. But so I was a bit surprised that it didn't come up in the conversation today, because that is clearly where there's going to be a tremendous need for support, adaptation support. Sea level rise is going to have an impact directly on all small island states. But where the economics come in, and I think that's the point, is that it is of the interest for everyone, because the consequences of sea level rise, and the small island states know much better than I do, they're living it, will entail possibilities such as, we look at issues such as possible displacement, migration, all these things that will require tremendous support. So I wonder where that fits in. I guess that's my question. And how that would also serve to motivate philanthropists, because it's not just an investment in the island itself, but it's an investment for everyone, actually, to be able to preserve and protect the small island states against something that is directly linked to climate change, of course, and sea level rise. I will stop there.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure that we are going to be able to answer that question now, because it is, as you suggest, a very involved question. But could I just sort of ask everybody, well, not everybody, because if we have everybody, we'll be here way beyond when we're meant to be, but ask a few people to make a few concluding remarks. And Karina, if I could just come to you first, because you had raised your hand. And try and frame your remarks if you can. And I'm going to turn to 3 or 4 people, because we then do have to wrap up, around this question of, what transformation in philanthropy is now needed to step up to some of the urgent challenges that, and of course we've just heard one there, urgent challenges that small island states face. Karina, can I just sort of ask you to make a few concluding remarks?
Thank you. I can't resist but thanking the last speaker for the question, and simply to say, in terms of sea level rise, it's implicit. Climate change is an existential crisis and threat in the Pacific, and I'm just very conscious. I'm sitting next to the president of Marshall Islands, and the last time I was there, my favorite breakfast spot had literally crumbled into the ocean, so it's just part of our everyday reality. And I think we choose to take a strengths-based approach and think sort of from a futures perspective, how do we build? And I think when I originally put my hand up, it's because I was so pumped by Sanjan's pitch, particularly to the Pacific, and I wish I'd talked to him before we made the pitch to Jeff Bezos. But luckily we had President Whips and the former Prime Minister of Tonga make a similar pitch. Speaking to some of the comments today, the Bezos Earth Fund has certainly taken a huge risk. We pitched to them an idea where we leveraged Pacific unity and solidarity, and the fact that Pacific people know the solutions to some of these problems in the Pacific. And what we need to do is to cohere some of this so that we can
sort of roll out some of our plans at the regional level, at the sub-regional level, at the national level, at the local municipality level, and at the community level. All of that is being encompassed within Unlocking Blue Pacific Prosperity. And I also, this is not really a flex, but it kind of is, the Pacific forecast the downturn. I think perhaps not without, I don't think we expected the level of drama that we've seen over the last 6 months or years, but certainly I'm in the position I am because Pacific countries established a partnerships and resource mobilization unit to think from a futures perspective on this stuff. So, the Pacific has long held a mantra: we are friends to all and enemies to none, and that enables us to be agile. And some characteristics of our region are always true. We're always far away. We are blessed with big oceans and also small populations, so we always have small tax bases. And so then when you are anticipating a global fiscal downturn in a region that is predominantly reliant on public funding and grants in particular, you must be innovative. So I certainly reject the idea that philanthropy is needed for us to be innovative. We are voyagers, we are survivors, we are navigators, we are innately innovative. And I think a practical next step for that we would posit to our partners, philanthropic, public, private, and otherwise, is that you could dock on to the sort of mega strategic attempts to cohere efforts. So in one sense, for the Pacific, you've heard from leaders talk about unlocking Blue Pacific prosperity. It's an effort that's led by 22 Pacific countries to try to grapple with all of the comments that were made today. And our Solutions Lab that we're convening this week is an attempt to tap into the global expertise and mesh that together with some of our locally grown expertise to understand what are the market conditions that can lead to a circular economy, a sustainable ocean economy. What is the sets of portfolios of various instruments that will get us there. And Unlocking Blue Pacific Prosperity is an attempt to answer those questions and then write them up in a neat brief so that we can deliver them to our leaders.
Karina, thank you. And I'm just going to use my chair's authority to just ask one more comment, really. And President Whips, I just wonder if you would like to respond to some of the conversation that's been going on here, and I think hugely positive and fascinating conversation that's been going on, if you'd like to respond.
Well, I think most importantly is we always have to have hope. And, when we have challenging times, I think it's an opportunity for us to have a reset and rethink how we do things better. What's happening in the U.S. to me is an opportunity for us to reset. As Pacific Islands, we go out and we say, well, we need this help. But what we're saying is we need you to partner and invest with us. And I think what Gunter said is we have assets. Let's work together to build a prosperous and sustainable future for all of us. So one of the messages that I've had since my inauguration is trying to partner with our bilateral partners, bring private sector investment into our islands. Let's develop together. How can we win together? And I think a lot of times maybe as philanthropists or governments, they see that it's only a one-way street. But I think it's important for us to share that it's about for all of us winning together. That's
Fantastic message. Thank you so much, President Whips. Thank you. We really are running out of time. I'm just going to ask Masanori Kobayashi from Sasakawa Peace Foundation to make a few final sort of observations around this, and then after that, ask Atsushi Tsunami, the president of the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, to make final comments.
Thank you, and it's really wonderful to listen to all those inspiring comments and suggestions. And I think catalytic and leveraging roles expressed to the philanthropy organizations, I think it's really important suggestions. And I think one question I've been having is that what are we supposed to leverage and catalyze? Is it really the funding, or is it really knowledge or networking or stakeholder connections, innovations, innovative approaches, or transformations? I think these are the kind of elements that I saw that participants here really alluded as expectations to the philanthropy. And I think we really appreciate your suggestion, and we'll take back and use it as resources for internal discussions. And I really thank you for very enthusiastic participation in this discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And just to help us close out, Atsushi Tsunami, the president of the Sasakawa Peace Foundation. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. You know, one of the toughest things being the president of the foundation is to ask only to come and make a final remarks with a prepared speech and sit tight, listen to such an exciting comment, particularly coming from the academic background. And so many, your views and thoughts and your comments are inspiring and educational, and particularly coming for thinking of what we can do as a philanthropy and the private foundation. To look to the bright future of our friends in small island states and see the bright future for all of us together. And in a very difficult times, as already been mentioned. But you know, I sincerely like to convey my thanks for the participants and also the audience for such a wonderful and provocative comments and sharing your thoughts and views. And I guess I would leave some of my comments till day after tomorrow, Charlie, right? And in a panel, now inviting me as a panelist. So in the World Economic Summit. Anyway, I was told that my colleague, Mr. Uno, the executive director of Nippon Foundation, earlier today unveiled the plan to convey the World Island Summit in forthcoming year. And as you have already alluded to, and how we, the Nippon Foundation, the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, will work together to do the good preparation for this coming summit, and also to lead some of these very important points and the thoughts that you leave today for leading to this summit and make the actionable scientific knowledge and actionable to lead to the action itself. So, but once again, thank you very much. Enjoy it.
Thank you, everybody. I think we can halt the filming now, if you could. Yes, for those of us that are going to the high-level reception at the British Embassy, I think there's time now to get over there. I think it's for the speakers for the World Ocean Summit. And for those others that are still here, the Sasakawa Peace Foundation would like to invite you to a reception on the 10th floor. So please do go which way you are planning to go. Thank you very much.